thank you very much for having me. This has been a wonderful school, and yeah, I'm very, very honored to speak here. Oh, awesome. Yeah, so the title is AI in Healthcare. I gave it a subtitle, The Long Journey from Ideation to Market Adoption. So I will talk a little bit about what it takes to get from an idea in AI in healthcare and make it to a product. And this is, I recently joined GE Healthcare, and this is the mission of GE Healthcare. So the goal is to create a world where healthcare has no limits. So healthcare, to make it affordable, accessible, and equitable. And here's the outline of my talk. So I want to start with a little background and introduction to give you a little background on my own journey and on AI. And then I will address a question that I think is a really important question. How, if you want to innovate, or if you want to create a product or company, how do you decide what to work on? Because there's so many opportunities. And I want to share a little bit what my thought process was, and then also some of the things that I learned later that I wish I would have known when I started the process. And then I will give some examples from Caption Health, from the products we are developing. But I think a lot of what I'm talking about will be very general and will apply even outside healthcare. And then there's a break, and then depending on how much time there is, I can go a little bit deeper into what the different steps are. So I would like to, many of you might not remember this, but back in the time there was something that's called a blackboard, and then became a whiteboard, and then it completely disappeared. But I would like to make it a little bit more like as a whiteboard lecture. And so I start with the introduction. So the maybe a very short history of AI. And so this is how it looks to me. So if you have time here, maybe the point where I think the first really important point was 1966. I mean, does anyone know what happened in 1966? Yeah, exactly. There was the Dartmouth conference, and so there was what's called the computer, no, was it computer vision? Computer vision summer project. So this was when the first hype around AI was there, and people thought, okay, now we have understood how this all is going to work, and we're going to solve intelligent machines, and the vision part of it, which is of course very important, we're going to give this to some interns over the summer to solve. And then, of course, for many years, there wasn't really the progress that was expected. And then what happened is there was the AI winter, and people lost their belief in that it would ever work. And so I myself was at the time, of course not 1966, but sometime later around in the 2000s, I was in academia, and I was also trying to solve this problem. How can we understand how the visual system is doing object recognition? And I think I was really lucky, because then in 2012, so what happened in 2012? I think we talked about it many times in many lectures here. So this is, there was AlexNet. And so this is where the deep learning revolution, I think, started, at least the current wave. And so I mentioned this because for me it was a really important experience that for many years we tried to work on these problems, and we didn't know if it can ever be solved. And then suddenly in 2012, computer vision could recognize objects. And so this really changed everything. And then the startup I was involved in at the time was acquired, and then we thought about very careful what can we do now that there are so many opportunities, and this is what I want to talk about a little bit today. And one reason is that the next big event, I think, was in 2022 with ChatGPT, and I think that we recently just had another enormous event like back in 2012. And so again, there's this step function where there are lots of things that we can do today that even just 2 years ago, I certainly didn't believe that I would ever see this happening. And so all of you who are now wondering what is a good problem to work on, I think it's a very similar situation on how I was in like 10 years ago. And So then if you ask yourself, so what is a good problem to work on? So basically, find a good problem. So the way I look at it is, so you all, of course, I assume you are very interested in technology and innovation, and so there's the one aspect is that you want to have a very innovative idea or something. So I go more into this, but something that is possible today, or maybe not quite possible, but you have confidence that you can make this work within the next 1 or 2 years or so. And but this, if you find such a problem, that itself is not enough to be successful and get this out there in the world, because you also need to have a product that people actually want to use and pay for if you want to be successful as with a startup, for example. And so that means you need a need or a market, and that really shrinks the number of problems that are suitable. And then the last thing is, I think it's really important that you work on something that has impact, because there's lots of problems that are technically interesting and make a lot of money potentially, but don't really have a positive impact. And so that makes it a really hard problem to find something that is here in this space. And in our case with Caption, so maybe I would formulate it as healthcare for everyone is, I think, the big goal. And doing this with AI and ultrasound. So that might sound quite abstract, but there are some examples that I will give. So the one example number one is what we call echo guidance. And the example number two is obstetrics ultrasound screening. And if you attended the session yesterday that Bishesh gave, he mentioned both of these as some very important or fruitful areas in healthcare that he's also working on. And when I go over this, so I want to share a concept or an idea that was very influential for me. And so it's by Simon Sinek, and it's called Start with Why. I don't know if anyone is familiar. It might be a little bit dated by now because it's more than, it was I think 2009 or so, but there's a TED talk that really influenced me, and the way, what it describes is that if you look at here, this year is basically the why we are working on this. So we really want to have a goal that is a big goal in the future, so that make healthcare more accessible. And then once you know why you're actually working, then the next step is you have to figure out how you're actually going to do it. And AI and ultrasound, I will go through this, has the potential to solve this problem. And then you have to figure out a product or multiple products, and this is the what you're going to do. And I think it's very important because often as engineers or technologists, you focus on this how. For example, in the school, most of the lectures and most of the education you need is how you're going to solve problems. But then when you actually want to move forward and solve a problem, you have to figure out what you're going to do and why you're actually going to do it. And so this is basically the outline of the next slides. I want to go through the why, the how, and the what, and then give you some examples from healthcare, from Caption. But as I said, I do think this is very general, and I think it's a good framework to think about where you spend significant time of your life in the future. So the why, as I said, for me, that is that I would like to have a positive impact. I think it's a personal question, of course, but everyone has to find this out, why you are driven to do the work. And I'm encouraging everyone to really think of the really big problems, because any new startup, any new product will take years of work, and so you might as well work on a big problem. And the one that we identified was in healthcare. There are a lot of preventable diseases. And I list the second problem because I think it's very much related or has similar causes. So there's a lot of healthcare inequity. And yeah, so any idea what these two problems have in common, or why they might have the same solution? So I think the big issue here is access to healthcare. And again, I will go into details how this can be done with ultrasound and AI, but again, in my opinion, this is something that is very general, something that AI can be very helpful with. So for example, if you're passionate about access to education, or access to food security, or financial services, I think these are all problems that would have an enormous impact, and AI has the potential to address those. And so yeah, maybe going back to healthcare, I just want to give some examples that motivated me personally. So the first problem we focused on is heart disease, and so this is a really big problem. It's the biggest killer worldwide. So it's almost 18 million people die there each year, and you can see that for particular heart disease, heart failure, there's 38% are diagnosed in the emergency room, and so this is at a point where it's really late to do anything about it, and half of those people, they actually had potential symptoms 6 months earlier already, and so this is really something that medicine is very reactive, and with AI and ultrasound, I will show you hopefully this can be shifted to be a little bit more preventative. And in terms of inequity, so 80% of the deaths from heart from heart disease are in low and middle income countries, so the burden is not equally distributed. So I think they have the chance to benefit from it particularly. And the other area that, as I said, we started in this cardiac space, but the project we are involved with right now, and NAMI is also collaborating with us on that, and is also involved in that, is about fetal and maternal health. And again, these are the numbers which I find shocking each time I see it. So it's about 800 women die every day for out of preventable causes during childbirth. So it's an incredible high number. And in this case, 95% of those cases are in low and middle income countries. And of course, there's also the children who die in the first month after birth. It's a big number. And so yeah, I will, maybe one more comment. I highlighted the burden in low and middle income countries of these diseases, but this is not just a problem of low and middle income countries. So the United States of America, which is a high income country, they have a lot of areas here where there's basically no medical care, no maternity medical care. In this case, I think there are different similar maps for other professions, but basically the places that are, I believe it's about 50% of women who live in rural areas, they have to drive more than 30 miles to the closest medical healthcare professional, and I think 10% they even have to drive 100 miles. And so this is really, this inequity is a problem that is a global problem, not only in low-income countries. So I hope I have convinced you that this is a really important problem to work on, and we heard in other talks in the school, there are lots of similar problems that you could work on. And now I will talk a little bit about how we can solve this. And the example number one, as I said, is echo guidance. Let me just see that I keep track of time. So I have till 1:30, is that right? Okay. So the problem that we were addressing, and I think, actually, let's start with the motivation. Here again, simple graph. This is time, and so over time, the cost of ultrasound devices is going down, I think, roughly exponentially. And so this is a consequence of essentially of Moore's law. So all the circuitry, all the computation in devices, but also even the transducers, so the hardware that does the imaging, can be fabricated with integrated circuits, and over time the cost goes down and the size goes down. And concretely, for ultrasound devices, they used to be as big as a whole room, and today even the high-end devices are still size of maybe a fridge and cost like $200,000. But in recent years, the size went down to these handheld devices that you can keep in your pocket, and the cost is down to a few $1,000s. So there's 2 orders of magnitude in cost and in size. And if this happens, so of course, we've seen this with a lot of other devices like cell phones or digital cameras and things like that. The adoption should really go up. But even though we have these 2 orders of magnitude in size and cost going down, ultrasound adoption is not gone up like that. And so I don't know, do you have an idea why that is? I think, sorry? Yes, exactly. The problem is that today the users of ultrasound, they have a lot of training in the US. That is a sonographer, for example, in other countries, or there's also radiologists, but they're very highly trained people, and everyone who is trained to do ultrasound already is using an ultrasound device. So there's really no one to sell a new device, except someone who maybe wants to upgrade. So there's no way to increase this if you don't make it easier for people to use it. And so what is necessary is here that the required skill level has to go down, and this is where AI can come in. And then there's this huge potential of the culmination of having these low-cost devices and then the required skill going down, that you can use the devices for diagnostic purposes, and a lot of these diseases I mentioned, they can really be easily detected, and in many cases then the harm can be prevented. And so how does it work, echo guidance? So the way the echocardiography works, you have your handheld probe here on the chest, and what happened here? And then it's connected to your phone, or let's make this a little bigger, to a tablet, and you see some ultrasound structures here. But this is basically, it sends like a two-dimensional sound plane and listens to the echoes and shows you what this two-dimensional cut, what organs are there. And in order to get an interpretable image, you have to manipulate the probe. So you might have to move it up or down, or left or right, or maybe increase the pressure, or you maybe have to rotate it or angle it. So there are lots of manipulations, many degrees of freedom, and it's very difficult to get a perfect view like in the textbook that you need to do diagnostics. So if you want to diagnose a certain heart valve, you really have to be able to see it, and this is something these sonographers or radiologists learn. And so essentially, on a very high level, there is basically, if you know the pose of the device, then the image you see follows from that. But if you see the image and you want to infer what the pose is or how you have to move it, this is an inverse problem that humans can solve in their head, but you can train AI to solve that, and then you can end up with a device that tells you how you should move the probe to get the ideal image. So as I said, I'm talking on a very high level. I'm not going into how exactly we are doing this, but essentially deep learning enables this to solve this inverse problem. And then maybe just a quick showing you how that looks like then. So, a traditional ultrasound device only shows this cone here, and when you have this AI software installed, you get lots of more features here with guidance. So it tells you you're looking for a particular view of the heart, and it shows you roughly where you have to put the probe, and it also shows you how the view looks like that you would like to achieve. So this is the textbook view I was talking about. and then you can move the probe around, and this here, this quality meter, it shows you how close or how good you are. And then there are icons that tell you, make you suggestions what you should do. In this case, it's suggesting that you should rotate the probe counterclockwise. And once you have a good view, it recognizes this automatically, records the view, and then moves to the next view. And so this allows, that was FDA approved as a device that allows non-experts to do ultrasound of the heart. The idea with this, of the acquiring data in blind sweeps has been around for a while. So there's this one publication that I mentioned there. There are multiple others, but in this publication it was shown that if you do these blind sweeps and then you ask an expert to assess those blind sweeps for certain abnormalities, that they do as good a job as if you would do a very targeted standard exam. And so again, these are high-level things that you might ask. You might want to ask, is this a single fetus or is it twin? And you can see this in the sweeps, and it's very important because it's much higher risk if you have twins, for example. Another question you might ask is, what is it's called the fetal presentation. So is it lying head down or is it lying head up, right? And again, if you have the sweep, you can tell where the head is, and if it's the wrong way, you have a higher risk. And just one more example, the placenta, if it's obstructing the path out, it's very dangerous. But you can, with segmentation and computer vision, you can detect it and you can figure out, is it lying in the right place or is it too low lying, and these kind of things you can do there. So to your question, this has been done, people have been sent into the community to do these sweeps, but the AI interpretation is something that exists in publications, so there are other groups that have shown this in theory, but it is not yet out there as an approved medical device.
Thank you.
It's not a real-time demo, but a little video. It's just, I think, 90 seconds or so that you can see it in action. So initially it just shows you this place where you put it, and it tells you that you should put the probe on the chest. And then once it's on the chest, it shows you the image you want to get to and starts giving you instruction. Here it says, tilt the probe down, slide it up a little bit. And so this is the kind of training you have to give before you have to tell people what that means to slide up. And if it has the right view, it says, please hold it here, and it records it and it jumps to the next view. Here you can see they're called apical views. They're not on the top of the chest, you have them from the side here, and they're pointing towards the apex of the heart. And then you can get something that's the so-called four-chamber view, apical four-chamber view. It has all the four heart chambers. And once the quality is good enough, it records the image. And I have to make you go through one more view here, which is called an apical two-chamber view, which is an orthogonal view. And the reason why we record those two orthogonal views is that from those two views you can estimate how well the heart is pumping, because you can estimate the volume when it's expanded and the volume when it's contracted, and it tells you how well the heart is ejecting the blood. So it's called ejection fraction, and so we also developed an AI algorithm that gives you the ejection fraction automatically here. And so of course there are many more algorithms that you could implement, many more diagnostic assessments you can do based on these images, and this is just the first one that we implemented. But the main thing is, since you enable the recording of ultrasound views, you can now send someone in the community who is maybe a lower trained, lower cost worker, and then get these images, and then you can interpret them remotely, and it really has the potential to increase the access to cardiac ultrasound. Okay, yeah, that's just yeah, there's some papers where we showed that that it actually works. So you have to do these clinical studies, of course, to get FDA clearance. But we also published those. And now I want to just mention the second example. And so it was mentioned yesterday also in a talk. So the concept here is a little bit different. Rather than telling the person how to exactly manipulate the probe to get a particular view of the fetus, for example, there's a different idea, and so here's a paper where this is described. You have certain sweeps over the abdomen, and so basically you sweep it vertically and horizontally, and then you record those video clips, and again, you don't really have to understand any anatomy or anything. You just move it along using these outside markers. And then the idea is that the black box AI model is doing all the rest. It will extract all the views that are necessary to make assessment and does all the assessments. And that might initially not be of the same quality as an expert scan. However, it can be used as a screening tool. So you could send a midwife into some rural area. Actually, they're already going into these rural areas and talk to the pregnant mothers, and you could give them an ultrasound device, and they do this little procedure that just takes a few minutes, and then the device would maybe just classify if you have a high-risk pregnancy and you should go into a higher care center, or if it's a low-risk one and you can just proceed as you would otherwise and maybe give birth at home or in a rural clinic. And again, the hypothesis is that if you give this to everyone, essentially, so the World Health Organization actually recommended that every pregnant woman should have an ultrasound scan, and so if with this technology you can make this happen, then hopefully all the high-risk cases will go into higher care settings that often are available, and a lot of deaths can be hopefully prevented. Where are we? Just have to remind myself what the... Yeah, I think these were the examples, and I'm much faster than I expected to be, because I think usually I have a lot of interactions, and I just keep talking here and go through much faster. But hopefully we can add some interactions. So why don't we open this up for questions at this point? Because I think I talked about a lot of concepts, and I would love to hear where you have questions or.
If you guys have any questions, please raise your hand.
Oh, I'm not done yet, but
thank you.
So what's the size of the device that somebody has to take to the rural areas?
Yeah, it's like the microphone here. It's really small. So yeah, so
So all the calculations happen on the device, or is it sent to some cloud platform to run the algorithm?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So we do not want to utilize. So we want to have it work offline. So we are not sending any information to the cloud for this, so this is all happening on the device. However, when I say device, so you have this probe, which is wirelessly or with a USB wire connected to a handheld device, like an iPad or an Android tablet or a cell phone. And these days, the compute power of these devices is actually very high compared to the compute in the dedicated circuits that you had back in the time. And so a lot of the computation happen on the GPU or CPU in the handheld device. And I think this is, again, this is something that can be used, I think, for a lot of different ideas. We saw some examples yesterday where you utilize the cell phone camera and maybe you put an extra lens and you have a microscope, and then you can utilize the compute power in the devices. So all of that basically comes for free once you have a cell phone.
So has this been done somewhere before, or is it just proposed to be conducted here?
So you are talking about the guidance or the
obstacles?
Yeah. So the idea with this of the acquiring data in blind sweeps has been around for a while. So there's this one publication that I mentioned there. There are multiple others, but in this publication it was shown that if you do these blind sweeps and then you ask an expert to assess those blind sweeps for certain abnormalities, that they do as good a job as if you would do a very targeted standard exam. And so again, these are high-level things that you might ask. You might want to ask, is this a single fetus or is it a twin? And you can see this in the sweeps. And it's very important because it's much higher risk if you have twins, for example. Another question you might ask is, what is it's called the fetal presentation. So is it lying head down or is it lying head up, right? And again, if you have the sweep, you can tell where the head is. And if it's the wrong way, you have a higher risk. And then just one more example, the placenta, if it's obstructing the path out, it's very dangerous. But you can, with segmentation and computer vision, you can detect it and you can figure out, is it lying in the right place or is it too low lying, you know? And these kind of things you can do there. So to your question, this has been done. People have been sent into the community to do these sweeps, but the AI interpretation is something that exists in publications. So there are other groups that have shown this in theory, but it is not yet out there as an approved medical device.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kilian. I wanted to ask about what is the price of the device, and do you guys have any immediate plans on reducing size and cost? Because you mentioned that it was a few $1,000s, but we want to talk about its use in rural areas. If we talk about our country, in Nepal, the average income of the family is only about a few $1,000s per year. It's usually under $10,000, and families in rural areas, some families will have less than $1,000 income per year. So buying and using such all-in-one devices for them is almost impossible. So do you have like any immediate plans for the next few years on the size and cost?
Yeah, very good point, very good question. Of course, I'm saying it only cost a few $1,000s, but of course that was meant in contrast to this 100,000, but it's a high price point, and there are many families who could not afford this. I just want to clarify, this device would be owned by maybe the clinic, wherever the nurse is working, so they have to buy this device. So it's not one per family, it's one per healthcare provider, and it is still, of course, a significant cost in those low resource settings, and the hope is that the cost will go down. And so there's some part of it is, I showed you the curve, right? As long, it is my belief that as long as the market increases, the cost will go down. So a lot of the reason that it's still quite costly is that there are lots of custom things in there, and the price will go down over time. And there are more and more companies who are providing the hardware, and we do in fact work with other companies in order to get the device out there to lower resource settings. And so the price point, the target price point is more maybe around $1,000, but I know this should go further down, but this is where we are currently.
So already you talked about the problem with distance of maternity care from its family. So now how does this solution connect to that problem? Like you said, like they still have to go to the clinic, right?
Sorry, I have trouble understanding you. Can you repeat it?
Okay, earlier you talked about the distances between the maternity care and the families, and they had to travel quite a lot to get to the clinic, right? So
Yes.
how does this solution connect to that?
Yeah. Yeah. So also very good question. So maybe there is a little bit an indirect connection, because if you don't have any healthcare provider and this tool is only to be used by healthcare providers, it doesn't solve the problem, right? But I think in general, the idea that there was a tendency to centralize medical diagnostics, because you can get better experts, bigger machines, and so on, if you have everything in a central place. So typically you go to an imaging center where an expert radiologist sits with a $200,000 ultrasound machine. And what I'm saying is, if you get these devices to lower level care centers, like a local clinic, they are much easier to reach than the big hospital. And so the idea is to push it further and further down, and if the cost goes down enough, then any primary care physician could have it. But you're right, in these areas where you don't even have primary care physicians, it's a problem. But there is a potential to put this into, in the US you have healthcare also provided with companies like CVS and Walgreens. They give you a flu shot and measure your blood pressure. And so if you get it down to that ease of use and that price point, then it could really go out there. And maybe in the far future, maybe it can be used by consumers themselves. And of course, that is not possible today. But if the ease of use goes down so much, if it's so easy, then like a blood pressure cuff that you can use at home, maybe one day this is possible. But you're right, there's still some gap between the problem I showed, which was more a long-term goal, and the solution we have today.
Hello, sir. My question is regarding what happens when new cases arise. So as you mentioned that the midwives, they get to scan and they figure out whether it's a high-risk pregnancy or a low-risk pregnancy. But what if there are cases that have not been diagnosed yet? We've always figured out, even this happens during pregnancy, we didn't know one of the cases. What happens when there are undiagnosed cases, and how accurate is the solution?
Yeah, so very good. So the accuracy, so a lot of these diagnostics that I mentioned, we are in the process of developing them, and other groups are in the process. So I don't have an answer what the performance is today. I know from the literature, and it was presented yesterday too, that one measurement, which is the age of the fetus, you can determine it from a sweep like this at the same accuracy that an expert would do it with a state-of-the-art. And these problems, just my intuition from knowing computer vision and looking at the problem, I do think a lot of them are very well solvable, and we actually have to go the other way around. We have to ask ourselves, what is the performance target that we have to reach so that it's responsible and safe to give this device out there in the world, right? And then typically what you do is you look at what is the standard of care, what if they would go to see an expert, what would be the failure rate, and then when you match this, you can feel good about putting this into the use. And I don't have the exact numbers, but you're right, there will always be cases where you miss a diagnosis, and you just have to make sure that this is as rare as possible, that you have some performance target, and yeah, so that is the approach.
Also adding to the question, does it also determine whether the baby is healthy or not? Apart from the placentas and the age of the fetus itself, the risk remains when the baby inside the womb is healthy or not, whether it has some kinds of diseases or some sort of immunity diseases. When the fetus rejects the blood of the mother, things like that. What happens in those cases? Have those cases been studied as well?
Yeah, so here I have to, of course, mention I don't have any medical background, and so I'm, with this particular disease that you mentioned with the rejection of the blood, I'm not familiar with how that would show up, or if it would show up in ultrasound. But in general, of course, this is the goal, to detect conditions of the fetus as well, because it can be dangerous for the fetus and can be dangerous for the mother in some cases. And maybe I can give you some examples where I'm quite optimistic that this will work. One is you should be able from ultrasound to see if the heart is beating, and that is something that, of course, as a mother you're very interested in finding out, right? And then if you want to, I know that you can detect congenital heart diseases with ultrasound, but that is, even for an expert, is very difficult, and that will likely require, so I could imagine that this will require an approach where you actually guide to the heart rather than just sweeping past it real quick. So I think so there will be a limit what you can detect. But maybe one example is, even if you just look at the size of the fetus, and you can estimate the age of the fetus, you can then compare, does it have the right size for the age later in the pregnancy? And if it's in the lower 10 percentile, for example, there are certain measures that you can take to help the fetus and to increase the chances of survival. And so that is an example of something that's very actionable, and I think it should be very well possible to develop an algorithm doing that, but it's not out there yet. But I think a lot of these ideas are ideas also for people here to work on, because it's such an open field, and has so much potential.
Right, so one last question. If we use your device, and as a pregnant mother, I'm very happy that my fetus is okay, but actually if it was a misdiagnosis, if there was a problem to my fetus and I was so reliant on your device that it did not go to the clinic like myself, what happens in those cases? Do you provide a pre-agreement that please do not 100% believe on my device, or how would you want to sell this product?
Yeah, I think you're really honing on really important questions, and so I want to first highlight how important this question is, because what I was saying here is that we have a device that is doing something that is not quite the standard of care, right? I said it can detect some things, but it's not quite as good as if you have the expert looking at it. And then I quickly said, and then you just use it for screening, and this is exactly one of the concerns, is exactly the false negative rate, right? So you will have a lot of benefits for the people that you detect that then go and do follow-up. But there is a downside if you tell someone everything is okay, and they maybe use that as a reason not to go to the follow-up, that they otherwise maybe they would have traveled the 3 hours, right? And again, there has to be a very clear, you have to make the calculation, what does the performance have to be so that you have a net benefit, and it doesn't answer your question, what is with the individual, and that is, I think, outside my expertise, because that's more like a legal and compliance question, but I think what I personally would want to see is an outcome study that shows the outcome is better with this than without. But you're right, there might be one individual that got harmed that wouldn't have otherwise. And I don't have a good answer to that, what the legal situation is there.
Okay, so let's take one last question before continuing to the next section.
So thank you for sharing your journey and insights. So I'm curious about how you were able to identify a specific healthcare problem and that truly needed a solution, and what steps did you take to pinpoint it? So also, and how did you ensure that the solution you built could grow while staying relevant and impactful for a long time?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Since I mentioned I don't have the medical background, it is sometimes it's good to have this outside perspective, and you get some ideas that maybe someone in the field doesn't have, but then it's very important to talk to the experts and see what they think about it, and then it's a very iterative process. So, and maybe this is something that I will talk more in the remaining part, but there is an iterative process where you get feedback and you get more and more certainty that it is useful, and at some point you have to do this clinical study and prove that it's useful, and I don't know if this answers the question, if it's how you find out that it's useful, and so, or to find a good problem. So I think it's a combination from just common sense and looking at the data. What is the biggest killer, right? What kills the most people? Is there something we can do? And then for me personally, since I was working in vision and ultrasound, you ask, what are the kind of conditions you can detect with that? And the second part of your question was, how do we make sure that this is sustainable and will benefit for a long time? And so this is also a very complicated question. So there's, I'm not sure which aspect of it you were thinking of, but of course, if you put a hardware in the field, at some point the hardware will break. Is this what you're talking about? Or in general, if you build a sustainable company that sells this and then work with local people, and so you have to, I think this is what I was talking about in terms of adoption, right? You hope that you create this market and people will keep using it, and companies will keep supplying this solution, and it will go down in cost and will increase in impact. But as a startup founder, you're not fully in control of that, of course. So was this enough of a, do people want a 5-minute break, or should we just start? Was this enough of a break to continue? Okay. And so we only so far solved the first problem. You identify something you want to work on, and maybe you have a high-level idea how that might work, and I just want to, so I wanted to share a little bit how what all the things are that it takes over time that I personally only learned step by step. And yeah, I wish I would have known how long and complicated this path is, or maybe on the other hand, maybe it's good you don't know it all ahead of time, because otherwise maybe you wouldn't take on this journey. But so I just want to explain a little bit on a higher level. So if you want to go from an idea to the market, I just want to maybe list the steps that are involved. So you have an idea, and then you do what I think all of you did in the last couple of days. You build like a prototype to figure out if it looks promising, and if it does, you maybe build a full product, and then you have to, in the healthcare case, you have to build it at medical grade and give it in the hands of users and get feedback. And so there's a little bit of iteration, but at some point, if you feel it works, then you have to do what's called clinical validation, which means you have a more controlled study where you define beforehand what the outcome should be, and then you give it in the hands of healthcare professionals in the use case, and you prove to yourself and to the regulatory bodies that the device is working, and then you can submit it and you get clearance. Clearance. In the United States, it's the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, that gives you approval for the device. And there are other regulatory bodies in other countries. And then once you have it cleared, then only then you have the right to do some marketing and sales. And then when people like the device and want to buy it, then you have to go to production. And this part, it's so important to mention all of this, because what you will realize if you start a startup, then so you want to build a product, but in order to build a product, you actually need an organization that is able to build this product. So that so maybe this is clear, but it is actually, yeah. So we had to learn this step by step. So basically, what you need to get an idea that is just you, but to build a prototype, maybe you need help, and you need like an engineering team. Maybe it's only 1 or 2 people, or 3 or 5, but then when you want to build a product, oftentimes it's not enough to have engineers to do that. So there's other skills. You need like a designer or a design team, and also a product team or product person. And then, yeah, once you're happy with the device, as I said, you have to do clinical validation. And that is a science by itself, and so you need a clinical team, and to submit it for clearance, you need like a quality and regulatory team, and then there's where a commercial team comes in, and maybe an operations team. And the reason why I'm saying this is that at each of these steps, it can happen that you find out that you did the wrong thing before. So, for example, if you build a prototype without having any good idea how the product looks, if you then afterwards hire product and people and designers, they might tell you, oh, this product is not going to work the way you wanted it, and you have to change it. And similarly, when you want to validate it in a clinical setting, there are lots more constraints, and then you might have to change it again. And then when you finally submit it to the FDA, they might tell you, oh, the way you did your clinical study is not actually like how we want to see it, and you have to do a different study. And so I'm saying all of this because it basically means you have to talk to all of these people as early as possible. But early in the path of the company, these people don't exist yet in the company, you know, because you don't have the resources to hire all these different teams. The company is growing at the same time as the product is growing. And so this is a very difficult balance you have to do. So on the one hand, you have to get lots of input from different specialties, but for resource reasons, you can't hire them all in the beginning. And also, yeah, it's a little bit of a blessing and a curse, but also a blessing, because if you had all these people, they probably would tell you at the beginning it's not going to work, because it's such an iterative process, and so the prototype you have in the beginning is not going to work because you have to develop it. So anyways, that is the point that, yeah, you can basically fail at every single step, and in the most extreme case, you can get approval by the FDA, but never sell a device because you're only allowed to market it afterwards, and then maybe find out that people are not interested. So anyway, so I talked about the product and the organization. There's one more thing that you need for AI products that is really important to think about right from the beginning. I think almost every startup pitch yesterday was asked the question, I don't know if so how do you build an AI algorithm? What do you need to build a functioning AI algorithm? So maybe it's obvious, but you need data. And so you definitely need data even when you want to try out your prototype. And then if you want to train a real functioning product, you need lots of more data. And then when you do clinical validation, you need even more data. And now this has to be very specific clinical data with different statistics that you picked out. And so this is something that, for AI algorithm, is something early on you have to figure out how you're going to get the data you need, and how much does it cost, and all of these things. Yeah, so maybe I can share how that looked for Caption Health. So here's a little bit of a timeline. So it took over 10 years to get to the acquisition in the end. So it took, we got clearance much earlier, but then there are additional iterations, and you just have to figure out for us, the commercial challenge is a really big challenge. Even though the product is working, it is not easy to change the healthcare system. Just going in and say, here, I have a product for you, and I want to change how you do healthcare. And so that is a talk by itself, but this is definitely something to get advice about early on in the journey. So yeah, maybe the last thing, sorry about that. The last thing I wanted to talk about is, give me 1 second. I maybe wanted to close the loop. So as I mentioned, our journey started here shortly after deep learning and image classification was working, and at the time we thought, okay, you can you can classify images, and it was pretty clear if you want to apply this to healthcare, there are some straightforward ways how you can apply this. So if you just finished a prototype that can distinguish a dog from a cat, then it's a fairly straightforward idea to maybe distinguish cancer from non-cancer and do image-based classification. And what we thought about is that, does this really solve the problem? And so our long-term goal was to expand the access to medical imaging, and if you only develop algorithms to interpret images, but you don't solve the problem how to even get the images, then you never reach the goal. And so this is something we recognized early on, and this is why we focused on this ultrasound guidance problem. And it turned out that even 10 years later, there was no other company out there that had a device like that, and that led to our success. So this is why I'm trying to deliver this message that it's really important you think very careful, and I think you are in a very exciting spot here shortly after 2022, and I think it's important to think about what are the kind of problems that people wanted to solve maybe since decades, and there was no solution, and now there could be a solution, and maybe think of the problems that are straightforward to do, and then keep thinking and think about what are maybe problems that will be important in 3, 4, 5 years when all the low-hanging fruit is done and when the world is changing because of all these developments. And yeah, so that is basically the main message I wanted to get across, that really focus on this problem. What are you solving, and how are you solving it, and why are you solving it? And then if you think about it carefully enough, then you can stick to it and have the persistence to work on it for years and years until you're successful. I wanted to share a little bit what all the things are that it takes over time that I personally only learned step by step. And yeah, I wish I would have known how long and complicated this path is, or maybe on the other hand, maybe it's good you don't know it all ahead of time, because otherwise maybe you wouldn't take on this journey. But so I just want to explain a little bit on a higher level. If you want to go from an idea to the market, I just want to maybe list the steps that are involved. So you have an idea, and then you do what I think all of you did in the last couple of days. You build like a prototype to figure out if it looks promising, and if it does, you maybe build a full product, and then you have to, in the healthcare case, you have to build it at medical grade and give it in the hands of users and get feedback. And so there's a little bit of iteration, but at some point, if you feel it works, then you have to do what's called clinical validation, which means you have a more controlled study where you define beforehand what the outcome should be, and then you give it in the hands of healthcare professionals in the use case, and you prove to yourself and to the regulatory bodies that the device is working, and then you can submit it and you get clearance. In the United States, it's the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, that give you approval for the device. And there are other regulatory bodies in other countries. And then once you have it cleared, then only then you have the right to do some marketing and sales, and then when people like the device and want to buy it, then you have to go to production. And this part, it's so important to mention all of this, because what you will realize if you start a startup, then so you want to build a product, but in order to build a product, you actually need an organization that is able to build this product. So that maybe this is clear, but it is actually, yeah. So we had to learn this step by step. So basically, what you need to get an idea that is just you, but to build a prototype, maybe you need help, and you need like an engineering team. Maybe it's only 1 or 2 people, or 3 or 5, but then when you want to build a product, oftentimes it's not enough to have engineers to do that. So there's other skills. You need like a designer or a design team, and also a product team or a product person. And then, yeah, once you're happy with the device, as I said, you have to do clinical validation, and that is a science by itself. And so you need a clinical team, and to submit it for clearance, you need like a quality and regulatory team, and then there's where a commercial team comes in, and maybe an operations team. And the reason why I'm saying this is that at each of these steps, it can happen that you find out that you did the wrong thing before. So, for example, if you build a prototype without having any good idea how the product looks, if you then afterwards hire product and people and designers, they might tell you, oh, this product is not going to work the way you wanted it, and you have to change it. And similarly, when you want to validate it in a clinical setting, there are lots more constraints, and then you might have to change it again. And then when you finally submit it to the FDA, they might tell you, oh, the way you did your clinical study is not actually like how we want to see it, and you have to do a different study. And so I'm saying all of this because it basically means you have to talk to all of these people as early as possible. But early in the path of the company, these people don't exist yet in the company, because you don't have the resources to hire all these different teams. The company is growing at the same time as the product is growing. And so this is a very difficult balance you have to do. So on the one hand, you have to get lots of input from different specialties, but for resource reasons, you can't hire them all in the beginning. And also, it's a little bit of a blessing and a curse, but also a blessing, because if you had all these people, they probably would tell you in the beginning that it's not going to work, because it's such an iterative process, and so the prototype you have in the beginning is not going to work because you have to develop it. So anyways, that is the point that you can basically fail at every single step, and in the most extreme case, you can get approval by the FDA, but never sell a device because you're only allowed to market it afterwards, and then maybe find out that people are not interested. So I talked about the product and the organization. There's one more thing that you need for AI products that is really important to think about right from the beginning. I think almost every startup pitch yesterday was asked the question. I don't know if... So how do you build an AI algorithm? What do you need to build a functioning AI algorithm? So maybe it's obvious, but you need data. And so you definitely need data even when you want to try out your prototype. And then if you want to train a real functioning product, you need lots of more data. And then when you do clinical validation, you need even more data. And now this has to be very specific clinical data with different statistics that you picked out. And so this is something that for AI algorithm is something you early on you have to figure out how you're going to get the data you need and how much does it cost and all of these things. Yeah, so maybe I can share how that looked for Caption Health. So here's a little bit of a timeline. So it took over 10 years to get to the acquisition in the end. So it took, we got clearance much earlier, but then there are additional iterations and you have to figure out for us, the commercial challenge is a really big challenge, even though the product is working. It is not easy to change the healthcare system. Just going in and say, here, I have a product for you, and I want to change how you do healthcare. And so that is a talk by itself, but this is definitely something to get advice about early on in the journey. So yeah, maybe the last thing, sorry about that. The last thing I wanted to talk about is, give me a second. I wanted to close the loop. So as I mentioned, our journey started here shortly after deep learning and image classification was working. And at the time, we thought, okay, you can classify images, and it was pretty clear if you want to apply this to healthcare, there are some straightforward ways how you can apply this. So if you just finished a prototype that can distinguish a dog from a cat, then it's a fairly straightforward idea to maybe distinguish cancer from non-cancer and do image-based classification. And what we thought about is that, does this really solve the problem? And so our long-term goal was to expand the access to medical imaging. And if you only develop algorithms to interpret images, but you don't solve the problem how to even get the images, then you never reach the goal. And so this is something we recognized early on, and this is why we focused on this ultrasound guidance problem. And it turned out that even 10 years later, there was no other company out there that had a device like that, and that led to our success. So this is why I'm trying to deliver this message that it's really important you think very careful, and I think you are in a very exciting spot here shortly after 2022, and I think it's important to think about what are the kind of problems that people wanted to solve maybe since decades, and there was no solution, and now there could be a solution, and maybe think of the problems that are straightforward to do, and then keep thinking and think about what are maybe problems that will be important in 3, 4, 5 years when all the low-hanging fruit is done and when the world is changing because of all these developments. And yeah, so that is basically the main message I wanted to get across, that really focus on this problem. What are you solving, and how are you solving it, and why are you solving it? And then if you think about it carefully enough, then you can stick to it and have the persistence to work on it for years and years until you're successful.
Let's have some questions. Queries or anything you like to ask?
Thank you for the lecture, sir. I'm a master's student on the Sunnyvale University, so I just want to ask 2 questions. So I'm coming with the first question about how the medical data you have used on the aspect of the industry. So when I was on the study group, I took the medical image class for the undergrads, and the professor, his name was Professor Zhao Zheng, and he could use the data because we are having the biggest medical center in the United States. So it was possible for using the medical data for the non-profit way, but for your case was using for the profit way. So how was the challenge for you to using it in the industry?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So the question is, what data did we use and how did we get the data? And and as you mentioned, that getting the data is really critical. And so as a startup, it's actually very, very difficult to go to. So we approached big hospitals, and we proposed that we use the data to develop this in an anonymized form. And the first problem we run into is that for ultrasound images, you actually often have personal information in the image, in the pixel data. And the only way at the time to de-identify it is to have a human work on this image study for 45 minutes. And so we wanted to have 1 million of those studies, and so that was a big problem. And so what we did is, on the technical side, we developed algorithms to do the de-identification ourselves, and then we built relationships with experts in the field who were interested in that kind of research, and then they would share the data with us in return for being involved with this research. And so these are some of the publications that came out of it. And there is this challenge with the privacy and de-identification. Then there are regulatory challenges. You have to have follow HIPAA laws and things like that, which is difficult as a startup. And then you have to find someone who is willing to give you the data, which in our experience, having a research relationship is good. And then you have to look, what rights do they even have, right? Do they have the rights to use the data for commercial interests? So, and I think that is different in different regions. In the US, if I understand it correctly, once you have the data de-identified, it's not considered human subjects data anymore. So at that point, you're not concerned anymore about consent of the patients. That is my understanding, but I do think that might be different with GDPR and EU laws, and it also still doesn't solve the problem. What we experience often is that at a big university, people realized how valuable the data is, and they were asking for a lot of money for the data. And so, I don't have a easy answer, but so this is what you have to navigate, and then maybe you find a place that checks all these boxes and is willing to give you the data in return for access to research.
Thank you, sir. I have another question. It's like a general question that I asked hiking, and I want to ask how the Bay Area really help you to meet investigators or together with researchers. How was it I have experience of the New York, but how was like good on the Bay Area to gather to operate the company?
Yeah, so maybe 2 points. One point is that, so yeah, as you know, there are a lot of investors in the Bay Area, and there are actually different types of investors. And so in the US you have, for example, investors that are specialized in investing in healthcare companies. And these are typically quite different investors than the investors that are investing in tech companies. And in general, what we found is that healthcare investors really would like to see that you have a product, ideally already FDA approval, and ideally already an idea how you reimburse the device and have solved all these commercial problems before they are willing to invest. And so one thing that was very good for us is that we found investors who are very willing to take a lot of technical risk and invest in us because they were coming from high-tech investment. And so that is one thing. And then the other question was how we found like I think medical collaborators and so on. So the experience we made is we found very high-profile experts in the field who got personally excited in working on this problem and working with us. And then they were so kind and opened their relationships to us. And so this is how we were able to work with a lot of good people. And I don't know if it particularly helped to be in the Bay Area, but certainly to be based in the United States was probably a big advantage.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rico. I was wondering if you had some advice for starting entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs, like new entrepreneurs. Any advice for new entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs here today?
Yeah, if you, that's a very general question. So I think in general, I would say what I try to get across is that this is a very difficult, very long road, but that it's really worth taking if you know why you're doing it. And so I jokingly said earlier, maybe it was good that we didn't know how hard it's going to be, but this was, I think, more a joke, because even now knowing all of this, I would do the same thing again. And so this is why I feel comfortable suggesting to you that you pick some really big and hard problem, because it's very rewarding when it goes through, and it gives you the persistence when you know what the end goal is.
Hello, sir. I have a question. So, with the rapid advancement in AI, what groundbreaking AI research project at GE Healthcare do you think will redefine the future of personalized medicine?
Sorry, what research project will...
With the research projects going on in GE Healthcare, what do you think will define the future of personalized medicine?
Yeah. So first of all, GE Healthcare is just this enormously big company, and I have some idea what's going on in GE Healthcare ultrasound, but there are lots of other really exciting healthcare areas, and especially when you talk about precision medicine and personalized medicine, there's a lot of work that is more on the treatment side, when you develop treatments that are very personalized to a person, and on the drug side, and then so on. And I'm actually not personally informed what all these projects are. And on the diagnostic side, I try to present what I personally think is the most transformative direction, and I think it's recognized in GE Healthcare how transformative it is, because you can imagine today most of the customers, or most of the money you make with selling these big devices, and if they cost 100 times more than the little handhelds, you make, of course, much more money. But long term, I think there will be a big market for these smaller devices, and so long term, there will be a big commercial benefit, and I think a big benefit for society as well. So this is why I'm so excited about this particular field. So AI and ultrasound is something that I think is really promising. Handheld ultrasound in particular.
Thank you, sir. Hi, I wanted to ask a problem that most AI models face when they are given data from cross-ethnic domains. If we use an AI model to train it on data from patients from the US, but we want to deploy it in a region in Nepal, some remote region in Nepal, how would that be possible?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. That is a really important point. Let me first add to this. So there is, as you mentioned, there's the problem with the data that can be different in different population. There's even the problem that the way how you solve problems might be different in the US than you would solve it here. And the traditional approach is you solve for the populations where you make profit first, and then you hope that it then gets wider adoption, and then you run into the problems that you mentioned. And so one thing that we are doing is that two things. One thing is from the very beginning, we collaborate with low-income country settings to validate that the approach we are taking makes sense in this setting. And then we engage to have studies, clinical studies, including in Nepal, to have the device in use, and that gives us the feedback from the clinicians in the setting, and it also gets us data that we can use then for training and validation. And even though the FDA strictly only clears or only regulates the US market and doesn't need us to acquire data from other countries, we are doing this anyways because we want this device to work and then be commercialized in other countries as well. So, but this is something you have to very carefully think about in the very beginning, that you get access to this kind of data and then also validate it on that. And so for this particular product, we are doing that.
Thank you.
Any questions, guys? Can you please raise your hand?
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. In between, you mentioned that the availability of ultrasound devices is only limited to clinical centers. And I want to mention one example, just opposite. That you might heard about something with here. This is kind of a suggestion. there is a high cost of intercolor lenses all over the world in somewhere in the history. But his hospital, Tigalonga Institute of Tigalonga Eye Hospital actually, they developed the very cheap, they manufacture actually the intraocular lenses in a very cheap prices and distributed all over the world. Even in low income countries, they distribute in free of cost, so that they now are treating more than 200,000 worldwide. So this ultrasound device also, if you see, if you decrease the price and distribute it to the low income countries and developing countries, this would be the great market. You mentioned that after increasing the market, the price will be reduced over the question of this student. Mm-hmm. So I suggest this kind of solution, because you have to first lower the price and distribute it with a good process. And another question is, I see you have masters in both mathematics and physics and PhD in physics. How you motivated to work in the health sector?
Yeah, good question. So I didn't give the whole history because there are so many turns in the past. But yeah, you're right. I originally worked in physics and mathematics, and when you remember these three things that are important to me, initially I was only interested in solving interesting problems, and I thought the most challenging and most interesting problems are in theoretical physics, and this is what I did there for a while. And then after a while I felt I really want to do something that people are using, and so that was the second aspect. I want to build something that people use, and that maybe that there's a market and maybe people pay for it, and that would be more satisfying. And that led me to go from physics more into neuroscience, because I thought if you make some discoveries there will be immediately so many use cases, whereas in string theory it will probably be beyond my lifetime that anyone will use it